David, Sandy has had a lot of experiences with going to visit the Eckes that were high initiates after Harold Klemp took over.
Right.
And if in all your research, I don't know if you talked about meeting what was his name, the guy after Paul Twitchell died. Who was that?
That was Darwin Gross. But I also met Twitchell's bodyguard, Twitchell's doctor, all those people that got disgruntled and upset after Twitchell died because they were fathers. They liked Paul Twitchell, but they didn't like Darwin Gross, and they definitely didn't like Harold. So yeah.
Well, see what this goes back, and you're exactly right. And it's I'm really happy to see you're skeptical about that, because there was a tremendous amount of fraud that was involved after Paul Twitchell died. As a matter of fact, when he died, his wife Gail sold the property rights to was it Darwin right away? Mm-hmm. Sold it to Darwin, and they scammed to make a religion out of Eckankar. They were going to bury the teachings that Paul was trying to accomplish of dealing with meeting with the real guides, and the real guide said this whole plan to set up Eckankar as a vehicle to share with the world the truth of the all-is creator, and the real guides like Rebbe Zartars and all the different ones that are helping guide us out of this matrix creation, and it was taken over and turned into a religion. Everything that happened after Paul Twitchell died was a scam. It was worse than Kingdom of the Cults. It was just all a scam, and everything that's happened. And those of us, like Sandy, she was in that whole time, and it wasn't until 1 year ago that we found out it was all a scam. And most of the Eckes that are still there are still being scammed, and they're being what we call tap-lined by reptilians to drain their astral body of physical functioning, so they can think and reason correctly. It's all a scam, and you're absolutely right. It's just unbelievable. I mean, they could make a movie out of it. It's almost like a Tom Clancy novel. What happened to Eckankar after Paul Twitchell died? It's all a scam, and all these members, like Val and my wife Sandy, that were in it for years and years and years. And it was less than a year ago that Sandy and I found out about how it was a scam. Val found out a few years ago, and Claudie several years ago. But, I mean, it was a scam for years and years and years. It still is a scam. And they turned it into a worshiping religion where they have a guru, just like in Kingdom of the Cults. They have somebody that everybody worships and doesn't do a darn thing for you. It just drags you into a reincarnation of lifetime after lifetime of total ignorance. You're absolutely right. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood that we have nothing to do with that Darwin and Harold Klemp nonsense. We're a total different entity than that now.
Yeah, no, I understand. And in fact, I could say this much: Paul Twitchell to me is a much more in terms of his history, a much more interesting character than Darwin Gross or Harold Klemp, because Twitchell was a very interesting character because he was in search. He was a member of the Self-Realization Fellowship for 5 years back in the 1950s to 55, because I had a good talk with his first wife. And then, as you know, he got initiated by Kirpal Singh in 55, and then joined Scientology in the late 50s. And he was a much more his wife said this very clearly. He said Paul Twitchell was a seeker. He was searching for something. So it's an interesting point. Where Darwin Gross seemed to me more interested in making money, and Harold Klemp, I'm not really certain of. I don't know about him. He seems kind of strange.
Well, and you're absolutely right, and that's you can't blame Paul Twitchell for searching for the truth and going through all these things. I went through 3 churches I got kicked out of. I thought, man, I got it made. I got it all figured out, and then all of a sudden I find out it's all a scam. We go through all these processes, and we're hopefully we're guided by the guides, so we have these experiences, and when we're ready to accept the truth, or, for a lot of people, it's really hard to accept, because if you tell your family and your friends that, hey man, I finally realized that Dwayne the Great Raiders, and Rebs Our Tires are the real thing. As soon as you tell your friends and neighbors, they're going to think you're nuts. Your employer will fire you. It's a real. It takes a real effort on somebody's part to, once you come to understand what the truth is. When you find it, it's sometimes overwhelming. And we all go through these stages. We have to go through all these experiences, and then one day the real guides say, okay, it's time for you to, you've come to the right source. Now it's time to wake up and get with the program, and offer what you can for it, help the all is, and that's where we are. We've come to that point where we realize that the all is a reality, and if you get a chance to read Dwayne the Great Writer's books, he just, he goes into a lot of this stuff that just can't be found anywhere on the planet.
I'm not defending Paul Twitchell in any way, but I'm look at his intent. What's his intent? Whatever he did was for the way I see it, the betterment of everybody. So the good and bad, the good and evil idea, that's a little, that's really marketed. Big time. What's the good and the evil? The black and the white, the dichotomies. It really doesn't matter. It's the intent behind it. Again, this may sound kind of strange or may be taken wrong, but it really doesn't matter. Look at the animals. Are they into like good and bad? Are they concerned about doing when the lion eats the deer? Is that evil? It's just, life is about survival. It's about just being real and waking up. So Paul did what he had to do in the short time he had to do it with, and whatever it looks like, that's just what he did to make it work for the time he was here. And when he was finished, he was finished. And then Darwin and Harold were to be the maintenance guys until Dwayne came along. Dwayne wasn't ready yet. They pretty much screwed it up. They claimed they were the master. They had the rod of power. Both of them did, which they didn't. They never reached that level of awareness. And then, so they messed it up. And then Dwayne comes along, and he actually wrote, when he was ready, when Rebizar gave him this position, he wrote the office, Eckankar office, and they excommunicated him. They wouldn't have anything to do with him, because he did meet Harold on the real side, and Harold shook his hand, saying, okay, you have the position now. But in the physical, Harold didn't relinquish his position. He kept it on. Because of his wife, primarily, his wife, Joni, is running the organization. It's a big, long story, too. But the point was that it's just the intent really is behind even the physical, or when you leave the physical and into the real side, your intent. Look at your intent. What is your intent? You've got to keep looking at that all the time to see if it's, where you're at with it, because that will that's your like engine in a way. It's not morals, your moral quality, or if you've been Mother Teresa, you've done good for everybody, even the saint that has done the most. If that person hasn't woken up to reality, then okay, it's good karma. You might come back as a rich person or something, but it's still that person hasn't woken up to the reality of why we're here, and just the recognition of this reality. This, we call it the all is, that just is. You can't add anything to it. You can't. It's like the sun shining. We use that example. It just is. No matter what you say or do, if you're a bad person, good person, if you deeds you've done are bad or good, or what you think, in your thoughts. It doesn't matter to the sun. It's seen it all through history. It just is. So what we do is align ourselves with this reality through singing the new you. And I don't know if you've looked into that, but the suggestion would be to sing it before bed or in your meditation and see what happens. See if it goes like this: new you. And for you, maybe you could sing for 2 hours. I don't know or most people go for 10, 15 minutes. But see what happens. Just an idea, just a suggestion to see if life gives you something of value. We're into value, like what's the value here? There isn't a lot in life, especially these days. So what we're offering and presenting has a great value for everybody. We are for everybody. We're not just for a few or select people. And everything is for everybody, even in the natural sense, in the nature. We've been marketed that only the very few, the smart guys, can be rich, and others have to suffer and struggle. But everything is for everybody. It's really neat the way it is. And the more you wake up, the more you see the reality that we've been accustomed to is just marketed. So like Bob mentioned, the reptilians basically. There's a hierarchy with the cabal, the bankers, the politicians, the cabal. It goes up on the line, and the reptilians, and so on to the gods of man, the Cal and the Ranjan, and all that. So it's intent. Basically, what I'm trying to say, the intent is very important. Look at a person's intent. So I look at Paul's intent. No matter what he did, that's why I rationalized still being in it once I read your books and what you had to say during that kind of, like a lot of anarchists, I just kind of, okay, but just like, what they say, well, it's my experiences that count and stuff like that. So I was along those lines. But now from this viewpoint, I see intent. Intent is very important. I don't know if there's anybody else that would like to speak up, Kelsey or Henry or anybody else. I don't know if Tim's on.
Thanks so much, Val, and thanks, David. Yeah, go ahead, Tim. This is Kelsey and Henry. We're here listening. We're planting microgreens, and we're picking some fruits off of the trees. We're all natural, Henry, in this all natural environment. So thanks for the show, guys. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering about when you meditate. You say, I have spent a lot of my life in meditation too. I don't know if you ever heard of meditation number 1. It's in the impersonal life. But anyway, in your meditation, do you just imagine things?
No, I don't imagine anything. What happens is, what you try to do, or at least the way I meditate, is I just relax, still the mind as much as possible. And then what happens is, the brain, the argument is this, is that our brains, from an evolutionary perspective, have evolved to be virtual simulators. As you know, like a lot of times during the day, we just simulate so many things. We disassociate, we daydream, we think about the future and the past. And what happens is when you do these simulations all the time, it's just wearing and tiring, and we're never really ever in a present moment. So what happens when I try to meditate is I try to witness those simulations to see how the brain actually operates, because that's what it's designed to do. And if you can get to the space before those simulations, then what happens is your brain, that is your mind, starts to get very still. As it becomes very still, it becomes aware of another state of awareness. And in that other state of awareness, you start to become lucid, like super aware, as you guys perhaps know. And so in that sense, what happens is you might see light, or you might hear sounds, and you might see things. Then what the key is to keep the focus, not to be distracted by what you see or even what you hear. And then what will happen, invariably what will happen is your body will go really, really numb, which is kind of scary at first because you think you're going to die. And you have this feeling of like leaving your body. So in my sense, the whole argument for my meditation is basically to become a witness to the simulations that your brain produces, not to get caught up into those. And then what happens is you get to achieve a higher state of consciousness. And in that way, you get a sense of bliss, a sense of presence that you would never have before. It's really quite wonderful. But, I don't try to make much out of that. Just that's what it is. It's like surfing. I surf and I love it. I ride a wave, get in the tube. It's fantastic. But I try not to make too much out of it. So I guess I was just talking about surfing as a metaphor and basically saying that I don't want to get too caught up in trying to interpret the ultimate significance of what happens in meditation, because otherwise then you start making an ism out of it. That's all.
Do you do your meditation for yourself, or is it for everyone?
Well, on one level, you could say I'm doing it for everyone and myself because, quite frankly, as you know, if you do your meditation, you do it well, you're much kinder, you're much nicer to everybody else. So in a weird way, it's like both. My kids like the fact I meditate, my family does, and but I don't have this idea that I'm somehow helping the world or doing things like that. My sense of it is that you just try to do the best you can. I've been a vegetarian for 46 years. I try to practice nonviolence. I like this Jainist idea. You may have heard of it called the Nikandavada, which means holding multiple worldviews. There's a very famous movie back in the Japanese movie called The Rashomon. And in that movie, there were multiple viewpoints. And the Jainist idea is to always think, okay, I have one viewpoint. David Lane has a viewpoint. You guys have a different viewpoint. Now, how open am I to listen to that? Or am I just going to be like, I don't buy that stuff? So the argument is to have multiple openings to multiple viewpoints, even if one may be skeptical or critical. So,
do you ask Rebazar when you have experiences with him what is real, like the truth, or?
Well, if you want me to be very frank with you, if I see Rebazar in my dreams, I think he's a figment of my imagination. Not that I'm putting him down. It's just that anything I see in my dreams, I would say is a figment of my imagination. I know that sounds a little radical, but that's the argument from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that whatever apparitions or beings that we see are not necessarily separate from who we are. The problem is we sometimes empower. Let me just I'll give you a much different story and see if it makes sense to you. Kirpal Singh, who was Twitchell's teacher, apparently claimed he had the ability to touch people on the forehead and they would have an inner experience. Okay, fine. They then also attributed it to Kirpal Singh. So they said, Kirpal Singh's got the power, blah, blah, blah. Well, it turns out that he didn't have the power. They were the ones generating those inner experiences, not Kirpal Singh, but he was taking credit for it. So in the same way here, people say Jesus did this for me, or Muhammad did this for me, or Guru Nanak did this for me. But as you guys said earlier, it's really your intention. It's really your faith, your devotion, your concentration that's generating the experience. But we sometimes attribute it to these other people or other beings, whereas in fact of the matter, it's really up to us. At least that's the argument that Pikirchan has presented and the Tibetan Book of the Dead has presented.
I was also wondering, as I test these new you sessions and trying to get real guidance and a real education about life, I'm told that, like Val was mentioning, your purity and sincerity and gratitude and humility, it sounds like until one becomes these more than anything in their life, they will never see the all is.
That's a good point. You know what? I think that's a very good point you make. I think, like you said, it comes down to a person's own sincerity and humility and all sorts of things. I think you're right on that. It really comes down to that. It makes a lot of sense.